Hey y'all, it's Jess and welcome back to Roots and Refuge Farm. We are in the greenhouse today for a devotional video. I actually mentioned this in my live video the other day because I had a handful of people ask me when I was going to put up another devotional video, and I knew this one was coming because I've really had this topic on my mind. Now today I want to share with you guys something that has been a really integral part of my walk with Jesus and also in my walk with other people. We're told in scripture by Jesus that people will know that we belong to him by how we love each other. Obviously our relationships with other people are largely an indicator of our relationship with him. If we have a hard time with relationships horizontally, a lot of times we can look at the issues that we're having there and we can find the same issue exists in our relationship with him. If we can learn to honestly look at how we interact with others, how we view others, and how we assume others view us, we can learn a whole lot about, the places where we could grow in our relationship with God. So I'm going to share kind of like something that I've walked through. This is anything that I'm bringing to you guys and like teaching you about or sharing with you. These are things that God has walked me through. These are things that I've learned in my walk with him through other teachers, through reading the word, through praying, through the last several years of having a really close relationship with Jesus and through the Holy Spirit. I've walked through some refining. I've walked through some pruning. I've walked through the areas where he's put his finger on hurt places in me and said, hey, I'd like to deal with that. And so I hope that I don't ever come off as being like preachy about this stuff. I mean, honestly, the places where I've grown and I've been given tools, I want to share those things. So that's where this message is coming from. And this is something that I feel incredibly grateful that God really showed me and taught me, because the richness of my life, the richness of my relationship with him, and the richness of my relationship with other people has just magnified just massively since grasping this lesson. So several years ago, this kind of starts at this particular point. I read a book by Gary Chapman called The 5 Love Languages. Many of you are probably familiar with it. It's often referenced, especially in like church culture. But if you've never read The 5 Love Languages, it's a great book and it's a great read, and they have all these tests that you can take to find out what your prominent love language is. But the idea behind this book is that people convey love in different ways. The 5 love languages are physical touch, words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, and gifts. And basically the premise behind this book is that, if my love language is quality time, but my husband's love language is acts of service, he can be doing things for me, expressing love to me the way that he knows how to express love, like cleaning up the kitchen or changing my oil or, doing things for me that are acts of service. But if my love language is like quality time and I want him to stop doing those things and just sit down and have a conversation with me and connect with me on a quality level, basically he is trying to love me in the way he knows how, but I'm not perceiving it because my love language is different than his. Okay, so that's the premise of this book. And basically the idea of what the book is teaching is that in learning what the love languages are and learning how to discern love languages in people you're in a relationship with, you can learn then how to be fluent in a way that you can make people feel loved in a way they receive it. And also you can express your needs more effectively to say, I really need, quality time. This is what makes me feel loved. And I think that this is a really, really great teaching. I also think that when God gives us revelation, we can treat it like a ceiling or we can treat it like a floor. When it comes to the 5 love languages, for so long it was something that really just kind of became law to me as far as, well, this is my love language and that's not, so don't do that for me if you really love me. And that's really not the right mindset to take, but I think that's kind of an easy thing to fall into whenever you learn something like this. So when it comes to the love languages, when I first started to take the test of what the love languages are, I kind of scored really high up as, words of affirmation or quality time. And then, it went down from there, and at the bottom of every test I ever took was gifts. It just every single time I scored almost nothing, and I would just very boldly say, gifts mean nothing to me, gifts don't make me feel loved, I don't care about gifts, whatever. Now some of you who watch my channel regularly are like, wait a second, I've heard you say the opposite, that you love gifts. Now I do, but we're getting to that. So you know, the love language book, they make this for where you can apply it to your children, to your parents, to your friends, to your spouse. Like, it's an across the board thing. Well, a couple of years ago, I was praying, and I was really searching out a lot of different things, and I was doing several different studies. And one particular night, I remember it really, really well. I was still pregnant with Benjamin, and I'd actually photographed a birth that night. It was still whenever I was doing birth photography. And I came home, and I was laying in bed, and I was just really kind of in this state of awe. It's a sense of wonder for me, like, wow. And I was just really in a place of gratitude, where I was feeling so loved by God that He in my life had given me something so precious that I get to experience stuff like that. And I guess I was just pondering that night love and how we perceive love. And I started to think about the fact that God is love. Like, He is love. And I started to think about the fact that we're made in His image. Where I was like, God, well, I mean, that means you speak all the love languages. You're fluent in the language of love. Like, you have to be. It's not like you speak one. But then a question kind of arose in me, and there's this thing that happens sometimes, like when you know something about God, but then you have a question rise up that seems to contradict what you know. And a lot of times what is happening there's kind of this tension that rises up because God doesn't contradict Himself. And so generally when that happens, I've said this before, it's a diving board. I mean, what that is an invitation into like a fresh understanding of who God is. In this particular instance, I started to think about the fact that He is fluent in all 5 love languages, and He made us in His image. And I was thinking, wouldn't that mean that we should be fluent in all 5 love languages as well? Why would God make us in His image to only perceive love a certain way? And I had this theory that maybe we are actually created to be fluent in love. We absolutely are 100% created in the image of God, the way He says that we are, and therefore maybe we are intended to be fluent in love, period. And I started to think about whenever, you know, I've been really broken. There have been times in my life that I was just very, very broken. And in those times, I think about basically my perception of love and in my relationships, and it felt very void of love. Honestly, even the people that really loved me, I couldn't see it. I was blind to it because of my own brokenness. And I started to think about people who are truly broken people, and I'm talking about the people who you know, really walk with a lot of like issues with like narcissism and abuse and all of these different things. And I've read so much about this because of certain encounters in my life and certain relationships with different people, and wanting to understand like what is going on here. At this time I was thinking about that. I was thinking about those people because basically we can become so far away from Him that we stop reflecting His goodness, and we stop, you know, we reflect our brokenness instead. And I was thinking about broken people that seem incapable of love. You know what I'm talking about. You know, there are people who just seem incapable of love. And even in our own brokenness, sometimes it feels impossible to feel loved by people. Do you know what I'm talking about? Anyway, I was thinking about it at the time, and I thought, well, what does that mean? Because if we're made in the image of God who speaks all love languages fully, and this teaching teaches that we have like a prominent love language, that must mean that, you know, our ability to speak a language can get broken. I don't believe that we were born and made in the image of something that's whole to walk in something that's partial. That's just not how the kingdom works. And I just began pondering that and looking at myself, and it came down to gifts. I came down to gifts. So I want to tell you a little bit about who I was as a kid. My birthday is December 16th. It's 9 days before Christmas. And every year throughout my entire childhood, I would take all of my birthday money and I would go spend it on gifts for my friends. And my mom would be infuriated. She'd be like, Jessie, stop it. Like, buy something for yourself. But what I wanted is I wanted to give gifts to people. That's what I wanted. And I would always say that, no, what I want to do is to give gifts to people, because I loved it. Whenever I was like 13 years old, I remember being so bothered that there were some of the girls at school that weren't in like the popular groups and that didn't have a lot of friends. And I would see like all these girls bringing gifts and exchanging gifts, but there were always some girls that got nothing. And I remember it used to break my heart, and for the longest time I would give the stuff I got away. Like by the end of the day I would be giving away all my gifts to these people, but then I would hurt the person who gave it to me, and I thought, well, that's not a solution. So this one particular year I went to the Dollar Tree and bought these body sprays, and I still remember this so well. I remember the way they smelled. I remember the tissue paper I wrapped them in, because it felt so good to me to do that. And I remember just being like the Oprah Winfrey of Dollar Tree body spray in the 8th grade that year, or whatever grade I was in, and giving these out to everybody who didn't get a present that day, and just being like, hey, I got you something, and watching them light up and watching them feel loved. And this went on, I mean, for all of my like growing up years. That's who I was as a person. But then when I was 18 years old, I got married for the first time. You know, Jeremiah and I were both married previously, and our family is blended. And I got married, and my husband was not a gift giver. He had grown up not being a gift giver. That was not like a big deal in his life. And so when we got married, I remember my first holiday season together just being wildly deflated. It being like, it wasn't a big deal. And truly, I mean, he wasn't bad. He was like, let's go do this, let's go do that. He was excited about the things that were expressing love to him, but it wasn't gifts. And we go into this period of just being, honestly, really broke young kids that got married really early. And there was never any money for gifts. There was never anything like that. And, you know, we had kids really young. I went through divorce, and then Jeremiah and I got married. And again, I mean, we were just broke. And over, you know, 10 years of adulthood of never having money to do gifts. And I would make really heartfelt homemade things and give them, but a lot of times I mean, I had experienced a handful of really disappointing situations where I put a lot of thought into something and it was the best I could do, and it wasn't met with a lot of gratitude. And not a malicious thing at all, but it was just a matter of it didn't move that person, because for whatever reason that love language didn't speak to them. And by the time I was in my late 20s, it just came down to the fact that I very much boldly declared that I did not care about gifts, that didn't matter to me, that was my least love language. But the truth is that I had experienced hurt and disappointment, and I had traded in fluency in something, and instead had took on the stance that I didn't speak that language, because I would have rather been silent in it than disappointed in it. And I didn't realize that, of course, at the time. I honestly didn't realize it. And so for the years of declaring boldly that the gifts was not my love language, and that meant nothing to me, that I didn't speak that language and it didn't move my heart, there was an unfolding of a series of events that God gave me very, very specific gifts. There was this one instance, and it was just a silly thing, but whenever Ezra was a baby, we actually weren't planning on Benjamin. Benjamin was our surprise baby. And when Ezra was a baby, and I'm thinking this is going to be my last baby, and I really wanted to buy this particular Cowprint car seat. It was an expensive brand, and I really wanted it. And it was silly. It was just a silly thing that I wanted this particular one, but I had wanted it with all my kids, and I never justified buying it because it cost more. And this one particular morning is when we still lived in town, and you know, Ezra's almost 6 now, so he was an infant, and I had to go buy a car seat that day. He needed a new car seat. He'd outgrown his baby one. I had been shopping around, and when it came down to doing it, we were trying to get out of debt. We were doing Dave Ramsey. There was no way to justify spending, all the extra money on this particular car seat because I wanted a Cowprint car seat. And I got up that morning and I told Maya that I was going to go buy the car seat, and I was like, I'm just going to buy the cheaper one. I can get a really nice one for like $100 and something bucks. And I got up and I thought, I need to go all the way over to the other side of town because there was a Babies R Us over there. And I did, and I drove over to the other side of town to go to this particular place, and I go in and I get the cheaper car seat and I put it in my cart, And it just pops in my head to walk to the back of the store. And this particular day, they had a clearance table set up. They never did before. And as soon as I came around the corner to the back of the store, I saw sitting on that clearance table the exact Cowprint car seat that I wanted so badly. And I walked over to it, and I'm like, my heart starts beating, because I'm like, is this for real? Like, this is really happening. And I go over there, and it's like $100. It's less than the one that I was gonna get. And it was just on clearance because they'd come out with like a newer model. And I put it in my cart, and I'm just like, thank you, Lord. Thank you for this. Like, you hear me. Like, you actually hear the things that matter to me. And I'm just having this moment with Jesus over this Cowprint car seat. And all of a sudden, this idea pops in my head. You need to tell the cashier about this. You need to testify this to the cashier. This is like 5 years ago. Like, you guys see me like testifying on YouTube, like no big, like it is a big deal to me. I still struggle sometimes with putting stuff like this out here. But 5 years ago, I was not this bold. Like, this boldness comes from just repeated instances like the one I'm telling you about. And so I get up to the cash register, and there are two cashiers, and one is like bubbly and bright, and one's like really surly looking. And of course, like, I know the surly one's the one I gotta go to. I'm thinking like, let me go to this bubbly bright person because they'll be easier to share this with. But I feel drawn to the one who looked like she was having a really bad day. I'm like, okay, so I pull in my cart and I put it up there, and I'm just like, so you know, I'm so excited about this car seat, and I'm really awkward about it. It was before I had a lot of confidence in like sharing anything about Jesus with anybody. I felt awkward. I felt uncomfortable. I was nervous. And I very nervously start sharing with her that this particular car seat is one I'd wanted for a very long time, and I had decided not to buy it, but I really felt led to come to that particular store that day, and it happened to be there on clearance. She looks at me and says nothing. I mean, like, deadpan, like she's not moved, she is not like inspired or anything. And she reaches out and scans a coupon and knocks the price down another $35 and makes the car seat like 70 bucks. I'm like, what just happened? And she was just like, one of the things that I can do in my life, she was like, I don't get to do ministry work because I have to work this job, but one of the things I do is I collect coupons to bless people. And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm just completely humbled, because here I think God's telling me to go share this because he's going to do something awesome for somebody else through me, but really in the obedience of sharing, even when it was uncomfortable, he blessed me further. And I was driving home that day and just completely in awe that God cares about the Cowprint, that God cares about the car seat, that God cares about the little things. And a lot of people at that time when I shared this, like, because I was so mind blown, and a lot of people are like, there are starving children in the world, you know, why? But you think God's giving you a car seat. And it's just kind of like, you know, I can do something about the starving children whenever I believe that God cares about the desires of my heart. I can step up and take responsibility for the brokenness of the world and start affecting change in it when I really believe that there is a God in heaven who is such a good and sweet and kind Father that he really wants to speak love to me in the details. And so, okay, fast forward a couple of years to where I'm really unfolding this revelation about the love languages, and I'm really being confronted with the fact that I have declared that gifts don't matter to me. And I start realizing that the whole time that I had given up the fluency in that love language, God had been speaking it to me in such gentleness and in such sweetness. And I began to look at the areas in my life where, even though I had said gifts don't matter to me, and I had closed that area down because I didn't want to experience any more hurt and disappointment, God had never stopped speaking that to me. And this piqued a question in me of, what else in me is broken? You know, what else in me? And for the longest time, I declared fully that I was not a hugger. I did not want anybody to touch me. Even honest, I'm just being completely transparent. There was even a long period before this revelation and really starting to seek myself out. I didn't really like my kids to touch me. Just being honest, like, breastfeeding was really hard for me. There were things about intimacy in my marriage that were really, really hard for me because I didn't like to be touched. So physical touch was another one of the love languages that was really, really difficult for me because of some things that I had been through as a young woman. I hated to be touched on. and I would tolerate it for those close relationships. I mean, I wasn't like ever mean to my children or anything like that, but there were times that like the constant touch and affection made my skin crawl a little bit. I want to be transparent about this. Even now I'm like, oh God, don't tell people that, people will judge you, but somebody probably needs to hear it. That there was a time in my life that I was broken. I was broken in that because I had essentially walked through some violation and some darkness that made me not want to be touched. And so in beginning to search out the gifts thing and realizing how sweet and tender God had been to me and how I had shut that down, I had to start looking elsewhere. Well, where else was I made to be fluent that I'm not fluent? And the physical touch thing was the thing that really I wasn't even prepared to look at, to be honest. Whenever this first happened, whenever I first started to realize this, I shut it down for a couple of months. Like, I couldn't even think about it. I was just like, no, I'm not going to be a hugger. No, I'm not going to be a touchy person and a physically affectionate person. I'm not willing to do that. But eventually, in beginning to experience more freedom in the other areas of love and really seeing how fully God loves us and understanding that He made us to be fluent in love. Because the thing is He said that people will know that we belong to Him by how we love one another. And He's come to give us life abundant. And so He's come to bring wholeness to us, to bind up the brokenhearted. He's come to take our broken pieces and put them back together and to heal us, to be able to be reflections of Him. And so that's going to show in how we love one another. And so what that means is it's available to us. It's available to us to walk in wholeness. It's available to us to see the places where we're broken. And He is going to work those things out. And honestly, there's so much freedom in recognizing that we weren't made to be broken. Like, there's so much freedom in recognizing that I don't have to cover up the places where I'm afraid for those places to get hurt and disappointed again. I don't have to shield those. He can be my defender and He can be my protector. And just like I had to open up the area and say, I enjoy giving and receiving gifts, that matters to me. And if I'm in a situation in a period of my life where I don't have enough money to do that to the extent that I want to, I'm going to trust God to work that out. I'm going to trust God that He's going to meet my efforts. And that if I put my whole heart into making a gift for someone and I give it to them and receive a really underwhelming response, I'm going to trust God that that is a seed planted that's going to bring about wholeness in that person's life. And I'm going to allow Him to be my fulfillment in that. And I experienced that so fully when it came to gift giving. And then as soon as He dealt with that issue that wasn't quite as hard to address, He moved on to the issue of physical touch. And again, He began to tell me, I want you to trust me to be your protector. I want you to trust me to be your purity. I want you to trust me to be these things for you. I want you to trust me to heal those things. And it was like, as soon as I was willing to take the cap off of it, and as soon as I was willing to say, okay, Lord, I don't like it when people touch me because it makes me feel this way. And I was able to have these very raw and honest conversations with God. He began to say, well, here's what's truth. Here's what's real. Here's this. Here's that. And I received so much healing. Like, if you guys have met me in person, which I know several of you have, I've probably hugged you. Like, you don't understand. Like, that would have never happened just like 4 or 5 years ago. I wouldn't have been able to. And whenever I was in situations like that where there were a lot of people who were touching me, I would get to the point of like, I would become panicked, honestly. I'm just truly trying to explain to you where I was and how far I've come. Because this revelation of using the love languages, I don't want to say that this is a wrong teaching. I think that it's a map. I think that whenever we take these tests to tell us what our prominent love languages are, I think that's great. I think we should know where we're fluent. But when we take the test and there are places that say, hey, you don't speak love this way, I think we should ask why. And the reason I wanted to share this now, and the reason I wanted to share this, you know, right here on the brink of Christmas, is I know a lot of people really struggle with this time of year because of having experienced disappointment in gift giving in the past. And I'm not talking about taking a stance against consumerism, because I'm all for taking a stance against consumerism. I am not for buying a bunch of junk, because that doesn't display love. Honestly, I think brokenness and gift giving can also present itself in other ways as overcompensation with spending a lot of money, and hearts still don't get moved towards, you know, love and affection. But I am saying that anytime you confront hardness and bitterness in yourself where there should be love, I think that we would do a great service to ourselves, to our own lives, to stop for a moment and say, why do I feel this way? Why do I think this way? And when you consider those 5 ways of expressing love, with acts of service and words of affirmation and physical touch and quality time and gifts, I think that if we'll look at those and say, are these things important to me? Why aren't these things important to me? And where did this get broken? I think there's a tremendous amount of inner healing that's available to us. And there's not a formula to it. There's not a, I don't really feel like there's a worksheet of sitting down and saying, okay, now pray this or ask this and read this and do this. But I've talked so many times before about having a real and honest conversation with God. He's not a formula. He's not, a genie in a bottle. It's not a magic, boop on the head, fairy godmother thing. Oh, let's fix that. And, there are programs and there's healing and there's all kinds of things that are good and beneficial things. But there's nothing that's more powerful than having an honest conversation with God. You just have to acknowledge the places that you're broken. And in that's how we can walk in forgiveness towards other people. I had to acknowledge the places that I was broken in gift giving because of some encounters with different people who were also broken in gift giving. And I was able to walk in compassion towards them and forgiveness towards them. They weren't being, malicious to me and not receiving what I had for them or not realizing that it was important to me. They were just broken. And in that, I was able to release that bitterness and that frustration, and I was able to find wholeness in a place where I had been broken before. And honestly, even when it came to the places where I was damaged in physical touch, in realizing that the people who had damaged me in that were also broken people, and they made bad choices and they did bad things. Again, it inspired compassion in me, and it was no longer who I was. The fact that I had experienced certain things was no longer who I was. It was no longer a reflection of my identity. It was the fact that I had encountered brokenness and had gotten broken in the process. And in acknowledging that and seeing that and taking that to Jesus and saying, okay, but you made me in the image of a fluent lover, of someone who speaks love as a first language, because it's who you are, and you made me in that image. And this place was broken, but I don't have to be conformed to the brokenness anymore that I experienced in an encounter. I want to encounter you now, and I want to be conformed to wholeness in this. And I'm telling you guys, my life is it's just completely different. The way I'm able to engage with people, the way I'm able to walk through situations that used to would have completely destroyed me, and now I'm able to walk through them with grace and compassion. My marriage is so much healthier. My relationship with my kids is so much healthier. The places where I used to struggle to show affection, it's very natural now. And I think that what I had to do is I had to come to a place, and instead of saying, well, I'm not a hugger, that's not my nature. I had to stop and say, hold on a second. My nature is made in the image of love. My nature is made in the image of perfect and fluent love. And so anything that's contrary to that is not my nature. That's just brokenness. I hope that you'll think about this. If you haven't read that book before, I think it's a good one to read with the thought in mind. It's not trying to figure out which one you speak. It's trying to figure out why you don't speak all of them. To have one that's completely defunct, I just don't believe that was what we were created for. I don't think that's wholeness. And so I want to encourage you guys going into this season, if this is something that you struggle with, and truly, a lot of people have no issues at all with gift giving. It was a hard one for me. And the Christmas time was a hard time for me because there was just this conflict in me. That's kind of why this has been on my mind, but it's across the board. This is a year-round message. It's something that we can always look at and say, where could I grow here? Where could I become closer to God? Where could I become more fluent in loving people and also receiving love from people? because a lot of times our relationships, there's just a disconnect. I mean, I can't tell you how many times Jeremiah and I have been in a place of like conflict where we're at each other, or we're having an issue, but really we're trying to say the same thing. We both really love each other and we both really want to be connected, but for some reason he's saying this and I'm hearing it this way, and we're just at each other because there's just a communication disconnect. And how many relationships in our life are we not experiencing the fullness of love in those relationships because there's just some broken communication, because there are some broken places where we were meant to be fluent and we're not. And I should add that truly whenever you start to realize this, you kind of become free of needing other people to love you the right way. And that's such a relief. Like, that is such a relief, because I remember honestly when I first really started hearing about the love languages, it was like, well, they don't love me the way that I can perceive it. That's kind of defeating the purpose of understanding that there are people that are going to love in different languages. They're going to love in different ways. And truly realizing that even when I couldn't receive love in a certain way, God poured his love out on me in that particular way to breathe life back onto that, because he wasn't satisfied with me being illiterate in that language. He continued to love me in that way to bring it back to health. When I realize how fully he satisfies and how fully he loves us, even when we don't realize it, even when we don't even give him any credit for it, it's crazy, because then it relieves the pressure on my husband to be the complete satisfaction of my need to be loved. It relieves that pressure off my relationships, my friends, my kids, my parents, to relieve, or to be my fulfillment. I no longer need them to do that anymore. I'm able to look at my life and say, wow, look how fully you've loved me, so fluently and so beautifully and so preciously. And I can then put my effort in loving Jesus back by loving his people, by loving other people. And then I see people's efforts. And I'm freed from this insatiable need that always feels unmet. I'm free from that brokenness. I'm able to see their efforts and see even their brokenness and have compassion for it, but see how they're loving me and be so thankful for it. I know that's a lot to kind of chew on. I hope that you'll start thinking about it and truly just start using that resource as a map to have some really open conversations with God. And I want to tell you that if there are places in you that are broken, that are hard to address, he has so much grace. And if you can acknowledge that there is brokenness there, and if you're even not ready to address it with him yet, acknowledge it to him, because that's the first step. And say, I see that this is broken. I don't want to be broken. And so I'm going to ask you to start loving that area until I can get to a place of really addressing it. Because our world is very, very broken, and I recognize that there are people who have gone through stuff that's even further than I can even imagine. And we do have an enemy that seeks whom he may devour, and his whole point is to keep us separate from God. And so, of course, he doesn't want us to be fluent in love, because then we can't hear God speaking to us at all. If we are, if we're so hurt in all these areas, we assume that God is bad and that he doesn't love us because we can't see it. And so I want to encourage you to just start seeking these things out. Start praying, open the conversation, and be prepared for just a beautiful unfolding of healing to come into your life. Because I believe that it is absolutely possible that we can walk fluently in love, and that we can experience that richness in our relationship with our Father, with our bridegroom, with our friend, the Holy Spirit, with each other, and even an appreciation for ourselves that gets broken. So I hope that does help. Thank you so much for watching. God bless you. Until next time.